Deputy Adams, would you let Deputy Adams ask this question? Deputy Collins, would you mind? Thanks very much. Well, I'm not interested in listening to you. I'm interested to hear Deputy Adams' question. Thank you.
Taoiseach, since the Stormont House Agreement was reached at Christmas, Sinn Féin has been engaging positively in party leaders' meetings at Stormont to ensure its full implementation. However, last week it became clear that the DUP was intent on reneging on commitments in that agreement. Martin McGuinness discovered that it was the intention of the DUP to provide only partial protection to current recipients of benefit and no protection whatsoever for future recipients, contrary to the Stormont House Agreement. In our view, they intended conceding this until after the legislation on the Welfare Reform Bill was passed. So I'm sure that you will agree that this is not part of the Stormont House Agreement. As a result, Sinn Féin and the SDLP had no option but to prevent the Welfare Reform Bill going through the Assembly. Now, Martin McGuinness has made it clear that it's our focus to resolve these problems, and our record has been very, very consistent. Ian Paisley has said, the late Ian Paisley, that Sinn Féin kept every single promise that we made. So despite refusals to honour the Good Friday and subsequent agreements, including the options of Act na Gaeilge, a Bill of Rights, a civic forum, an inquiry into the murder of Pat Finucane, Sinn Féin has not given up on the process, and we won't be giving up on the process now. However, it is clear that political institutions have to deliver for citizens, especially for disadvantaged citizens and those with disabilities, and that's more important than other considerations. So, Taoiseach, do you agree with me that a resolution to the present difficulties will only be found by everyone adhering fully to the terms of the Stormont House Agreement?
Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree that this is a serious matter, and that prior to Christmas the discussion was really whether the institutions would survive or not. And the opportunity of both governments becoming involved as co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, together with the dedicated work of Minister Flanagan and Minister Sherlock from the government here, together with the First and Deputy First Minister and the parties, brought about the Stormont House Agreement. Now, I'm interested in what you say, Deputy Adams, that the Deputy First Minister discovered that the DUP were not going to implement the agreement that was arrived at. And it should also be noted that the ministers from the government here were not a party to the detailed discussions about welfare reform that was an element of the agreement being arrived at. So if it's a case that the Deputy First Minister discovered that the DUP intended to renege upon the agreement actually reached, I'm not sure how that was discovered. Was it a memo? Was it a comment? Was it a paper provided by the DUP to say that they intended to renege upon the agreement that had already been reached? In any event, with the British elections early in May and an opportunity here to sit down as mature politicians and work this out, I think the essence of politics is called into being here. This can only be dealt with now by Deputy First Minister McGuinness and First Minister Robinson. They've got to sit down here and explain to the other parties what this row is about, and I'd like to know the nature of the discovery that the Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness was able to make. How come he was able to discover that the DUP intended suddenly at point X to renege upon an agreement entered into in December? I agree with you. This is something that should not have happened here. It's something that can be rectified, and it can only be rectified by the politicians sitting down and hammering out what it is that they agreed upon and being very clear about it in the interest of the people in Northern Ireland.
Deputy Adams. 1 minute, thank you.
Well, I'm disappointed that you don't know how Martin discovered, because your officials were fully briefed on that over the weekend, so you should know, Taoiseach. He discovered it because we were given papers. We believe by mistake, we believe it inadvertently, and when Martin discovered that, he spent several days last week, including during our Ardèche, trying to meet with the DUP. They failed to engage with us, but they were told fully of what our concerns were. And these are red line issues because, the essence of mature politics has to be to protect the disadvantaged, has to be to protect those who need the protection of society, and that's the core of this agreement. Now, you may recall that in 1998, Senator Mitchell, just after the Good Friday Agreement, said that was the easy bit. The hard bit, he said, was implementing it, and that has been our experience. And I have been critical at times of the government's handling of northern issues, but at the same time I know that these are very, very challenging, and it does require a constant focus with the British government on the ongoing process to ensure particularly the need for everyone to fulfil commitments.
Thank you.
So, in the absence of such clarity, and this is the initial question I put to you, every effort has to be made to ensure that all agreements are faithfully implemented. And what I said to you, Tommy Cricknahan, is, do you agree that the resolution of the present difficulties will only be found by everyone, that's everyone, adhering fully to the terms of the Stormont House Agreement?
Thank you.
And the Stormont House Agreement means particular conditions be adhered to. I don't have in front of me the difference between the detailed discussions on welfare reform that were conducted before Christmas, before the agreement was arrived at, and the details that apply now for welfare reform since the agreement was put together. Somewhere there seems to be a discrepancy in the mathematics here, if this is what the row is about. My understanding, and obviously the government weren't a party to the detailed discussions prior to Christmas about the welfare reform and what that would mean in reality for people, but there seems now to be a change in the figures that apply there. I think you've got to go back to that point. What was laid out in detail in papers before Christmas, and what has brought about, if that's the case, a change in those figures that affect people on rates of social welfare payments in various forms in Northern Ireland. This is a political matter, and it's a political matter that is very serious. These institutions have paved the way since the Good Friday Agreement for very many years, as you know. It hasn't been an easy journey in many respects. But this row was brewing before Christmas. All of the parties and the two governments got involved, and agreement was reached. An agreement was reached on a set of figures with details about them. The agreement was signed off on by everybody and accepted by everybody and welcomed by everybody. And now there seems to be a difference again in those figures. What has happened? I think that the Deputy First Minister needs to go back and rediscover why this drift in these figures, if this has happened. Well, if they were set out before Christmas and signed off on and accepted by the Deputy First Minister and commented and welcomed by him more fulsomely than your good self indeed, what has happened that the figures are now different than he accepted and agreed before Christmas? That's where the political discussions. That's what the political discussion has got to deal with. You don't want a situation where, with the first real difficult decision here, that the party is going to walk away. They welcomed this before Christmas, signed off on it on those conditions. You've got to go back there to where that welcome applied in the first instance.
Thank you. Deputy Coppinger.
Thank you, Cian Corlett. Taoiseach,